On the afternoon of May 20th, 685 AD, at a marshy lake known as Llyn Garin, hundreds of heavily armed men found their iron-clad boots sinking into freezing peat. These were the soldiers of King Ecgfrith's Northumbrian army. By every contemporary metric, they were the most lethal military force in Britain, yet they were now completely blinded by thick fog and restrictive terrain. Analyzing this event requires looking past the literary traditions of heroic tragedy to examine the specific tactical mechanics of asymmetric envelopment. By nightfall, Ecgfrith's army would be annihilated, the king would be dead, and the era of Northumbrian expansion into the north would end in a single afternoon. Examining the cold, mechanical reality of this engagement strips away the romanticized myths of early medieval warfare, revealing how a superior force is systematically dismantled. To understand the scale of the Northumbrian defeat, we must examine how they built their power. Prior to 685, Northumbria achieved hegemony by subjugating neighboring kingdoms using disciplined, conventional heavy infantry. A standard Northumbrian infantryman was encased in dense iron armor. Maintaining a kit of this weight and quality required a massive agricultural surplus, making the Northumbrian soldier an expensive, walking projection of state wealth. This conventional military force excelled in set-piece, open-field battles, where they could lock shields and completely crush their opponents. But that heavily armored lethality required massive, slow-moving logistical supply trains, carrying food, water, and equipment. Ecgfrith's army was a weapon perfectly designed to dominate open, resource-rich farmland. It was entirely unsuited for the expedition he was launching into the rugged northern highlands. By the late 670s, Ecgfrith's overextended empire was beginning to fracture. Localized rebellions by the Picts, Mercians, and Irish threatened the borders of Northumbrian control. Facing severe geopolitical friction, Ecgfrith decided to launch a punitive strike deep into the Pictish territory of Fortriu. The objective was to force a decisive battle and brutally reassert his dominance. He ordered this invasion against the explicit warnings of his own tactical advisors and religious counselors, including Bishop Cuthbert, who recognized the extreme risk of the operation. The immediate problem was geography. Marching an army reliant on heavy agricultural logistics across the Firth of Forth and into the resource-poor mountainous terrain of the north meant abandoning their primary tactical advantages. Waiting for them was the Pictish King Bridei mac Billy. Bridei commanded a force with a distinctly different cultural identity and military doctrine. He knew his lightly armed troops could not win a conventional force-on-force engagement against a wall of Northumbrian iron. Driven by political desperation, Ecgfrith ignored geographical realities. He turned what should have been a brief, localized punitive raid into a massive logistical gamble. The caloric burn for a Northumbrian soldier marching in heavy mail over a mountain pass is exponentially higher than a Pictish skirmisher. Bridei weaponized this discrepancy. His light units stayed out of range, forcing the Northumbrians to continuously expend peak energy to keep up. Operating in their own familiar, uneven territory, the Picts had superior mobility. This allowed Bridei to dictate the pace and the direction of the entire campaign. Lacking local scouts, Ecgfrith marched into a total intelligence vacuum. He was moving completely blind, capable of reacting only to the movements Bridei deliberately allowed him to see. Heavy armor only provides an advantage if you can force your enemy to stand and fight. When the enemy refuses to engage, that armor becomes a literal anchor, dragging an army toward physical exhaustion. Bridei employed a tactical doctrine known as the Feigned retreat. By deliberately trading physical space for time, he forced the Northumbrian formation to stretch itself thin in pursuit. This topographical map tracks the Northumbrian supply line pushing into the hostile, mountainous territory of Fortriu. Eager to crush the Picts, the column began to elongate. Forcing men through narrow geographical bottlenecks resulted in severed communication between the vanguard and the rearguard. The Northumbrian logistics effectively collapsed. Moving at a faster pace to catch the Pictish skirmishers meant the vanguard was now outrunning its own heavy supply carts and daily rations. The pursuit terminated at a narrow pass near a lake known as Llyn Garin, or Crane Lake. It was a dead end. tightly flanked by inaccessible mountains. The Picts had successfully funneled Ecgfrith's exhausted column into a predetermined kill zone. When the Northumbrians finally realized they were trapped in the gorge, the restrictive terrain prevented them from deploying their standard heavy shield wall. At that exact moment, thousands of Picts rose from the high ground, perfectly encircling the pass. The Picts opened the ambush using gravity to their advantage. They utilized their extreme mobility to strike downward into the physically exhausted Northumbrian ranks. Pressed into the wet peat of the bog, the Northumbrian heavy armor proved fatal. Sinking into the mud, the infantrymen lacked the leverage to pivot, retreat, or raise their shields against flanking maneuvers. The engagement devolved into a systematic mechanical slaughter. The mobile Pictish skirmishers easily dismantled the fragmented, immobilized clusters of heavy infantry. We have direct historical confirmation of this tactical inversion. This Pictish stone carving depicts a lightly armed foot soldier successfully routing a heavily armored Northumbrian cavalryman, proving the complete collapse of conventional tactics. King Ecgfrith was slain alongside his royal bodyguard. In a single afternoon, the bulk of the premier military force in Britain was wiped out. Dun Nechtain was won by geography, patience, and logistics long before the first sword was swung. The immediate result was a massive territorial retraction. The victorious Picts rapidly reclaimed all the lands that had previously been subjugated by the Northumbrians and the Dalriatan Scots. For the Northumbrian survivors trapped in the north, the fate was grim. Those who did not manage to flee south were either executed or permanently enslaved. The religious fallout was equally severe. The expansion of the Roman Catholic Church stalled entirely as the Northumbrian diocese inside Pictland was rapidly abandoned. Bishop Trumwine and his monks fled in a panic back to the safety of Whitby Abbey, permanently abandoning their northern outpost and establishing a new frontier for the church. Northumbria never regained its northern dominance. From this point on, Pictish independence remained secure, ending the expansionist phase of the Northumbrian kingdom. The ambush at Lyn Garan demonstrates a brutal military reality. Even the most technologically advanced and heavily armed forces cannot survive an engineered intelligence vacuum inside